And the final do is ensure that you have the guest on the...
When you do decide to start bringing guests on your podcast, try as much as possible to not play in the big leagues until you get ready for it.
Provide your own expertise. You are an authority. You have X amount of years experience, okay? Make sure you're sharing that and really bouncing as a part of that episode.
If you plan on having guests on your podcast, be sure that you're being tactical and that you have a strategy in place of why you're bringing a specific guest on your podcast.
Does their audience align with your audience? And this actually leads into the very first.
Many times they're thinking that their podcast needs to be with guests. And based on what we see and the strategy and what they're trying to achieve and the style of business and offer that they have, we come to the conclusion like, hey, you actually need to be doing solo episodes. Again, we can make a whole episode diving into this, but today the advice that we're about to give is for welcome legends to Podcast Marketing Secrets,
where we share all of the tactics and strategies from the #1 podcasting agency
on how to launch, grow, manage, and monetize a successful high converting podcast.
Let's take your business and content to the next level.
Welcome back to another episode of Pod Marketing Secrets. What are we talking today, Cal?
Alrighty, so today we are diving into guest episode do's and don'ts. However, there is something that we want to highlight before diving into some of the specifics with regards to your guest episodes, which is, Nels.
We just want to preface that the advice that we're about to give is for the specific group of people that we focus on serving, which is high-level business owners, founders, CEOs that are looking to become an authority, industry leader, and basically sell more of their stuff. Depending on who you are, this advice might be a little bit different. And we can make a whole episode in terms of knowing exactly what type of podcast or format of your podcast you should have. If it should be multiple people podcast, panel podcast, guest-based episodes. But you will be surprised that a lot of you don't know that you should be doing, in many cases, solo episodes, which is something that always shocks a lot of our clients when it comes to our Done For You services. When we go into the strategy of what we call the game plan call, which is where we map out everything that we're going to do for their podcast to be a top-level podcast and basically have a successful monetization in the back end for the businesses and attract their dream customers, is that many times they're thinking that their podcast needs to be with guests. And based on what we see and the strategy and what they're trying to achieve and the style of business and offer that they have, we come to the conclusion like, hey, you actually need to be doing solo episodes. And they look at us, it's always the same. They look at us, what? What do you mean by solo episodes? So it's always a bit of a surprise. And again, we can make a whole episode diving into this, but today we want to help you identify some of the do's and don'ts if you do want to go and create some guest episodes. And I just want to add one final note in here. If you plan on having guests on your podcast, be sure that you're being tactical and that you have a strategy in place of why you're bringing a specific guest on your podcast. Do not let everyone and anyone come to your podcast if you want to create a specific result out of your content.
Yeah, absolutely. And so just to expand upon what Nelson is saying there, be strategic. Does their audience align with your audience? And this actually leads into the very first do of guest podcasting, which is do set expectations, okay? If you're being strategic about bringing that guest onto your podcast, you might set an expectation that, okay, there's going to be X amount of short form content produced as a result of this podcast. I'm going to invite you as a collaborator on those pieces of content. And the expectation is that you accept 2 out of the 5 pieces of content. That is what I expect as a result of you being able to come onto my platform, my podcast, okay? So set some of those expectations up prior to them actually coming and getting into the podcast studio, because I tell you what, it is bloody awkward if you go to ask them afterwards and there's a bit of back and forth there. That's what we want to avoid, okay? So be very clear about what the expectations are for both parties coming into a guest episode.
Absolutely. The next one is to have a killer intro. When you bring a guest, especially if you're bringing high-level entrepreneurs, other founders, other CEOs, you want to make sure that they see that you did your research, that you didn't come to this conversation unprepared. And guess what? When you have a killer intro for your guest, you get them excited and it sets off the conversation on the right foot for that to be the best it can be and for your guest to provide the most amount of value for the audience.
Yeah, hype them up. Get them excited to be there. All right, the next thing is to dive into a meaty question. This is probably going to be on the list of don'ts, but I swear to God, if you ask them about what's your journey, what got you here so far, oh, you're going to lose your audience straight away, guaranteed. Something that's really important to note, guys, is that first minute of your podcast, even the first 30 seconds, is some of the most important airtime you're gonna get, all right? So do not waste that. Dive straight into something. If, say, the person that you're bringing on has been known for something particularly controversial, ask them for their opinion on it. Ask them for what has been, one of the worst moments that they've experienced. Ask them a meaty question with substance that's going to make people be like, holy crap, we're going there straight away. What could I expect for the rest of the episode, all right? That's where we want to start off. Start off with energy. Start off with impact.
Exactly right. And remember, even though your podcast very likely is free content that you're posting out there to reach new audiences, to attract your dream customers, to build trust, credibility, and just your know, like, trust factor, remember that your audience is giving you the most valuable asset that they have, their time. So if they're giving their time, they're expecting to get something valuable in return for that. So don't waste their time. Just dive straight into it, like how I just mentioned. The next thing is guide the conversation. This is your podcast, is your platform. Your guest should not be taking the lead on the show. You go there and you know exactly what are the subjects and things that you want to dive with your specific guest so that that episode is the most valuable it can be for the audience, for you, and for the guest.
Totally. And be responsible for bringing the guest back into line with the trajectory of the conversation, okay? If you hear them tangenting, guide them back to what it is that's the focus of that particular episode. The other thing, provide your own expertise. You are an authority. You have X amount of years experience, okay? Make sure you're sharing that and really bouncing as a part of that episode.
Excellent. The next one is, when you do decide to start bringing guests on your podcast, try as much as possible to not play in the big leagues until you get ready for it. Meaning, if you have access to a very high level individual that is going to bring a ton of value, or that you just want to bring into your platform for sakes of building relationships, networking, and so on, the strategy can be very different for everyone. Just make sure that you first get some reps before diving straight into the big leagues so that you come prepared and that episode actually turns into the best that it can be. So get started with lower level kind of guests, rack some episodes and reps in, and then keep moving higher in the ranks of the level of the guests that you bring.
Absolutely. And the final do is include your guest's photo, especially on your IG covers. Particularly if you're wanting them to collaborate on that piece of content, they're probably not going to want to accept a piece of content that's got your face plastered on it because it makes no sense sitting on their profile, all right? So I know sometimes there's branding and things that come into play there, but absolutely whenever possible, you want to find a middle ground so that it works for both parties. Let's jump into some of the don't. Let's jump into the first one, which is don't make your intro too long, okay? So this is sometimes people choose to pre-record intros for their guests or intro them on the spot. Just ensure that you're not diving into the history of where they came from, what their parents did. Keep to the relevant information. How many years of experience do they have? How much money have they made? Whatever that thing is that's going to actually give them credibility and authority, focus on that and keep it short and snappy.
Exactly. Do not sit back, relax, and just let the guest have the spotlight on the show. Be sure as well that if you do need to interject or interrupt the guest, do it in a clever way. And we have trainings and things that we provide to our Done For You clients and podcast licensees to be able to do this at a high level and to remain respectful within the show. But just to give you one that can help you is if you feel like your guest is just talking nonstop and you can't find a way to just add your own piece of value, try to give a visual cue. Usually, if you just go for something like this, it tells them straight away like, oh, I need to stop. He's about to say something and just jump. Cal, I love what you're saying in there. I just want to bring us back to the conversation when it comes to XYZ. And it's a really good way of just acknowledging what they said, but bringing everything back to where you want to keep the conversation.
So another don't is do not go on tangents or get caught up in random stories that have nothing to do with the purpose of the episode. Remember, your episodes should be focused around a specific topic, okay? And if a guest is telling a story and it's not really linking back to the main purpose, you're really going to want to step in there, use that advice that Nelson just gave you and bring it back, baby, because we do not want this getting derailed.
Absolutely. You do not want to go into a guest-based conversation without preparation. So it is ideal that you do research on your guest, and just before diving into it, just run them through the points and things that you want to cover for everyone to get the best outcome. So, hey, Cal, we're about to dive into money and the things that stop small businesses to actually be profitable. And I would love to dive into XYZ so that you already plant the seed for your guest of the things that you're going to be talking about in the episode.
Absolutely. One other thing to avoid with regards to your guest episodes is don't overwhelm them as well, right? Some people might not have been exposed to doing podcasts a whole lot. And there are a few things that you've probably picked up as an expert podcaster that you might want to tell them all about, how, different camera angles, when to do this, when to do that. Probably it's not necessary for your guests. Just give them the basics. Give them what it is that they need to know and just let them feel comfortable, because that's really what's going to allow you to engage in the most organic, flowing conversation possible.
And the last point that we want to cover in this episode is do not forget to give the opportunity to your guest to plug their business, services, offers, etc. Because any high-level entrepreneur or business owner that is jumping into someone else's podcast is expecting to also promote themselves. So make sure that you do give them that opportunity at the very end of the episode, and that your team links all the resources and relevant things of them down in the description of the episode in itself, because it's just gonna make them feel that they did get the valuable opportunity of exposure to a different audience. Cool, so that covers our entire episode today. Let us know in the comments down below if you're an existing podcaster. Have you made any of these mistakes when it comes to guest-based episodes? I hope you got a ton of value. We'll see you on the next one.
Thank you for joining us on Podcast Marketing Secrets. If you found value in this episode, the best way you can support us in continuing to deliver this content to you is by giving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube. Now, if you're keen to connect with us, we are at Vibez Creative on all your other social media platforms. Please send us your questions, engage with us, let us know what you want to hear about next on the podcast, and we'll be sure to create content around that.
And if you're interested in partnering with us for the highest level of support for you to be able to launch, grow, manage, and monetize a successful podcast for your business or your personal brand, we offer different levels of support, starting from our services, one-on-one coaching, as well as our completely done-for-you system. So if you're interested in finding out more, book a call with our team down in the description below.